It's been more than a month ever since we started seeing riots and these protests rocking the country. And I must say that it all kicked off with the closure of the now infamous Agency for International Development, what you call USAID. And what we saw Americans across the country taking to the streets in protest, trying to push back on this move, which is supposed to help those who are in need, who can't even take care of themselves. According to the news or mainstream media, that's what they were reporting. But the question I want to pose right now at this moment is that as much as it warms my heart to see Americans really care about the outside world and those who can take care of themselves, do they have all the information? Do they really know what's going on? Now, according to what we've been hearing all over the mainstream media, there are speculations or there are suggestions that once this is put down or once the whole agency is closed, we're going to see or start seeing death and destruction in all these countries that have been depending on this so-called aid. Now, that is the one part that I feel like Americans don't really understand what's really going on. And what they're doing is in good faith. But there is something that we call, there is exploitation of empathy. Let me put it that way. Now, according to what I had statements like this.
We can brag on Marco Rubio. I'd be happy to do it. But I'm going to tell you right now, people are going to die in very large numbers around the world who are expecting the United States to live up to our promises to get them medicine, to get them help. And when that happens, people are going to remember that. There are people right now who have HIV who are alive only because the United States is making sure of that. Donald Trump says, we don't care. You go die. That's the message from the United States government. It is the wrong message to be sending, and it opens up the door for China and other people say, at least we're a stable government who's not going to leave you out here to die. That's this is not an abstract conversation for people around the world.
Now, let's slow down and think about that. Because when you hear a statement like that, I can see why you can rush so fast to get to the streets and protest or try to push back on whatever is going on. But when you really pay attention and try to hear both sides and hear what they're talking about, it's easy to understand. And as someone who was born and raised in a third world country, I can tell you, I can speak to this with authority. I've lived it. I know what's going on down there. And having lived in America, I have two different perspectives. So I can tell you, coming from that side, when you go ahead and listen to both sides of the story, like I said, this is actually not the plan. I would like to look at this as an audit, balancing the books, the checks and balances, because you need to understand what's really going on. Now, I want you to listen to the Secretary of State in his interview, what exactly he was talking about, what they're planning to do with this agency. Now, here is Marco Rubio giving an interview because he was asked about the same thing, what they're planning to do with this whole saga. And here is what he had to say.
They have basically evolved into an agency that believes that they're not even a U.S. government agency, that they are a global charity, that they take the taxpayer money and they spend it as a global charity, irrespective of whether it is in the national interest or not in the national interest. One of the most common complaints you will get if you go to embassies around the world from State Department officials and ambassadors and the like is USAID is not only not cooperative, they undermine the work that we're doing in that country. They are supporting programs that upset the host government for whom we're trying to work with on a broader scale and so forth. So they're completely unresponsive. They just don't consider that they work for the U.S. They just think they're a global entity and that their master is the globe and not the United States. And that's not what the statute says, and that's not sustainable. President put a pause on all foreign aid. We found a lot of cooperation in the State Department, and we have issued dozens and dozens of waivers. As we go through all the foreign aid programs in the Department of State, the ones that make sense, we issue a waiver, they go back on. We've already done it for dozens of programs.
And you'll be issuing more waivers soon?
And we'll be doing so. For example, we did it today for some of the migrant flights that are going out of Panama. It's in our national interest to help them deport people that are headed towards the United States back to their home countries. And we'll issue some here today in El Salvador because they do a lot of cooperation with us on stopping drugs and stopping migration and so forth. So we're going through it at the State Department portion of foreign aid. We find cooperation. State Department people have been great, and we're issuing waivers and we're getting input and it's working. We go to USAID, which is a big chunk of foreign aid, $40 billion or so. They're completely uncooperative. They won't tell you what the programs are. They refuse to answer questions. They try to push through payments. Even after the executive order, they were still trying to push money through the system.
Can it be reformed or does it need to die?
Well, that was always the goal, was to reform it. But now we have rank insubordination. Now we have basically an active effort where their basic attitude is we don't work for anyone. We work for ourselves. No agency of government can tell us what to do. So the president made me the acting administrator. I've delegated that power to someone who's there full time, and we're going to go through the same process at USAID as we're going through now at the State Department. I think there are this is not about getting rid of foreign aid. There are things that we do through USAID that we should continue to do that makes sense. And we'll have to decide, is that better through the State Department or is that better through something, a reformed USAID? That's the process we're working through. There are things that are happening at USAID that we should not be involved in funding or that we have a lot of questions about, but they're completely uncooperative. So we had no choice but to take dramatic steps to bring this thing under control.
So it could exist in the future, USAID.
Well, the aid, I think it's important to separate USAID from aid programs, okay? Because everybody's acting like somehow these aid programs are impossible without an agency.
It's very process-oriented. I mean, do you think that we'll still be the most generous nation on earth at the end of this process?
I think we'll be the most generous nation on earth, but we think we're going to be the most generous nation on earth in a way that makes sense, that's in our national interest. We are going to fund programs that make America stronger or safer or more prosperous. We're going to pay for things that make sense for the United States. The United States government is not a charity. It is not a global charity. There are a lot of global charities, and they should go to, if you want to be involved in global charities, go join a global charity, raise private money and spend it on whatever you want. But this is taxpayer money. It's not my money. It's not their money. It's our money. It's taxpayer money.
You get what I'm saying? Now, when you look at all the things that are going on, the problem we're having right now is that as they continue to break down all these things that are being done, all these things that are being funded, the other side is not coming to challenge those things or speak about those things. They're just making a lot of noise, playing with your emotions, because we all know, when somebody can manipulate you emotionally, they can get you to do anything. Now, here are some of the things that they are talking about that they think are not okay. They are not worth spending taxpayers' money. And here is the president talking about exactly that.
$250,000 to increase vegan local climate action innovation in Zambia. $42 million for social and behavior change in Uganda. $14 million for improving public procurement in Serbia. $47 million for improving learning outcomes in Asia. Asia's doing very well with learning. You know what we're doing. Should use it ourselves. And $101 million for DEI contracts at the Department of Education. The most ever paid, nothing even like it.
Right. Now, when I started the video, I started with a question. As much as Americans really do care and show love and support for the outside world or the developing countries, are they really well versed in terms of foreign affairs? Now, I want you to watch and listen to this interview. This is a lady by the name Chihombori Kweyo Arikana. She's from Zimbabwe. She's a permanent representative of the African Union to the United States, at least she used to be. And she's well versed in terms of the affairs of the African continent. And in this interview, she sat down on Al Jazeera and she was talking about exactly what the Africans or the African leaders think about the USAID. And this is not just for the African leaders, but it's for the African continent in general. I want you to take a look, listen to what she has to say. And maybe after this conversation, you will have a clear understanding, or maybe you can sit back and try to think or rethink where you stand on this particular issue. Now, I'm not saying that you should listen or you should take everything I'm saying, but what I'm saying is I'm laying the foundation for you to be able to do your own research and understand what you're really fighting for.
As part of its mission to downsize the U.S. federal government, the Trump administration has suspended employment of thousands of USAID workers and has terminated its programs and most global humanitarian assistance. There have been some exceptions for life-saving programs, but these are small waivers amidst an onslaught of huge, massive aid cuts. Africa stands out as the most impacted. But what may disappear? humanitarian assistance, infrastructure support, medicine and food programs. These are all substantial for countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo, which receives about $1.34 billion each year. Ethiopia, which gets about $1.2 billion. Sudan, nearly $800 million. And other major grants going to Nigeria, to South Sudan, Kenya, Mozambique, Uganda, and more. But some see a silver lining in this gutting of U.S. support for the continent. With aid, they say, there has been substantial political meddling and resource exploitation that has demeaned and sidelined African empowerment and economic growth. So rather than trauma with the USAID cuts, there could be opportunity, they say. Today, we're talking with Ambassador Adikana Chihombori Kwao, a medical doctor and former permanent representative of the African Union to the United States. Ambassador, it is terrific to have you with me in stage here in studio. Let me just ask you, if I look through the USAID programs, some of which have been cut off, in Congo, there's an aid group, Action Against Hunger. This is they're treating tens of thousands of malnourished children. In Ethiopia, food assistance stopped for more than 1 million people, as we've seen these AID cuts go into force, really across the board with very, very few waivers. How is Africa feeling this moment? Do you see this as a story of tragedy, or is there something else that we need to be looking at?
I think there's something else we need to be looking at. There is need for readjustments. There is need for realignment. We need to understand the real reason why USAID is in Africa. And not just USAID, but other NGOs. You look at DFID, which is the British equivalent, and many other smaller ones. Their sole purpose was to act as if they're coming to rescue Africa. They're coming to fill in the gaps in government services, gaps in education, gaps in healthcare, gaps in humanitarian services. They're coming in the guise of addressing issues to do with human rights, issues to do with environmental protection and social justice. They are coming in claiming that they're introducing grassroots initiatives that are going to help the people. And so they use that as a way to go into the most remote parts of Africa. They're talking about government advocacy. When you look at it on paper, it all looks really good. But they're actually wolf in sheep's clothing. They are using that open access sounding humanitarian to constantly destabilize governments. I can tell you right now, the majority of African leaders, and not just African leaders, but leaders in the developing world, are celebrating the exit of USAID. I was listening to a program, I believe it was CNN, and I was jumping up and down. It was a government official from Hungary. He was echoing the same sentiments. He said they are happy USAID is leaving Hungary because they are always supporting opposition. Their form of government advocacy is supporting whoever can keep the government in a turmoil.
So, Ambassador, let me just jump in here for you. This is a message that I don't think many Americans hear. I think many Americans believe, not all of them, but many of them believe that AID was essentially set up for philanthropic reasons, for dealing with the HIV/AIDS crisis, dealing with the various instabilities in the region, dealing with infrastructure deficits. But you're saying that there was something else as part of that package, meddling.
A major meddling agenda, major meddling agenda. The majority of some of the workers, now the average USAID worker may not realize it, but quite a few of them are also operatives who are underground, and their major agenda is to destabilize governments, destabilize countries. If you think about it, their sole purpose, for example.
Now, I just wanted to jump in here real quick because everything she's saying right there, when we look at the USAID, for as long as it's been in Africa, there is no stability. There's never been stability. And there are so many agencies that are considered to be NGOs, which are not NGOs by definition, because NGO is supposed to be a non-government organization. But these agencies are funded by their governments. So the fact that they are described as NGOs in itself, I don't understand. Somebody might help me clarify that. But the point she's making right there is no African leader, and I'm quite sure you are yet to see any African leader complaining or crying about the closure of the USAID or any other developing country that is complaining about this issue. It's been a big issue in America, and America is fighting so hard, fighting more than the recipients of the so-called fund or aid. That's the crazy thing. And I don't blame them because they don't know. They don't know about all these things. They don't know how these things work. This is politics. Let's go ahead.
Their sole purpose, for example, filling in the gaps in healthcare and education. Where is the change? Show me one country that USAID was in and education improved. Show me what country where USAID was in and healthcare improved. The social services they're bringing, it's peanuts. The American taxpayer needs to know the billions of dollars that are being given to USAID, a fraction is making it to the people.
One of the highest profile medicine programs is PEPFAR, which both Republicans and Democrats here in Washington are really having outcries about. It was one of the signature programs of President George W. Bush to try to respond to the HIV/AIDS epidemic in Africa. What's the view on that front?
Let's look at what HIV/AIDS was used to do. We know of a program that was run out of South Africa where they actually were injecting people with the virus. The reason some of the AIDS virus spread as rapidly as it did in Southern Africa, there were some very dirty games being played on African people. They were using Africans as guinea pigs for experimental activities. Even when you look at every aspect, they're using us as guinea pigs. Yes, there is some good, a percentage of some good, but not all of it is done with good intentions. You look at agriculture, they're destroying African agriculture by introducing those GMOs. You plant your seed in one season, your soil is finished. We used to have seeds that we can use from one season to the other. The introduction of GMOs through these agencies, USAID is one of them. We are destroying Africa in a massive way.
And that is so true because I was talking to a friend. I remember I was talking to a friend and I was explaining to them how we used to do farming, at least how farming is done in Africa. And we never had this issue of buying seeds. We never knew that you go and buy seeds. Because once you grow, let's say you grow corn, that same corn, you can again reuse it for seeds. But now, with the introduction of these GMOs, you can't reuse that as seeds. And those are the seeds that are killing the soil. You can't grow anything organic on that same soil. Once you go GMO, you can never grow anything organic on that same soil.
A little good is coming out, but by and large, the end result, they mean no good. They can turn around and give us an inventory and say, as long as you have been in Africa and also other parts of the world, show us your success rate. You claim you are helping governments with education and healthcare. Show us your success rate. But I also turn around and say, African governments, why do you need this little aid to assist you in providing proper healthcare, proper education? The average African government can afford to provide those services for their people.
I happen to have many friends that work for USAID, both in the field but also in Washington. And I have to tell you, I know that they believe that they're doing good, that they're trying to move the needle for those that are in desperate situation and desperate conditions. I think it's very interesting to raise the question of what the other political purposes are. But as you sort of look at the scene now, the French are very big in aid programs. As you mentioned, the British, there are also Chinese aid programs. Are all of these programs essentially power plays and all of them need to be suspended? How do you see some of the other international programs in Africa now?
Well, these are all underground covert operations. Why does Africa need them? Why do we need them? Africa has been the provider. If you look at Europe, Europe cannot survive without Africa. One situation that people don't realize, post-World War,
the only problem Africa is facing, the biggest problem, is its leaders. Once Africa starts to get leaders that are for the people, really care about their countries and their people, they don't need those aid, that aid. They don't need nothing. They can take care of themselves. They have all the resources.
When the US came up with the Marshall Plan, What they don't tell you is that the contribution through exploitation of African minerals was actually the biggest funder of the European Recovery Plan, ERP, aka the Marshall Plan. US contributed $13 billion, which is now present day $175 billion, which, by the way, the American taxpayer must be paid back. Nobody's asking for that money back. But what they don't tell you is that Africa, through exploitation of its resources by the Europeans, was actually a much, much bigger contribution to the European recovery post-World War II. Nobody talks about that. Why does such a continent that did so much to help Europe recover continue to be so poor? Let's be realistic here. Let's not talk about peanuts. Africa does not need the aid. What we need is for those who are exploiting Africa to stop. Africa has everything it needs. If Africa could have contributed as much as it did to the recovery of Europe post-World War II, why wasn't Africa equally developed?
So what happens next, Adhikana? You and I have talked about this before, and the exploitation of minerals, of uranium, of cobalt, of nickel, et cetera, and many other rare earths, which is apparently very much on President Trump's mind, because we see the negotiation for rare earths with Ukraine. But you and I have talked about the artificially low prices and the fact that many economies in Africa don't participate in the gains and growth of the exploitation of those resources. What happens now when these aid programs are withdrawing? Does the social contract between American mining operations or other global mining operations, does it give an opportunity for the power dynamic to shift and change? And what will that look like?
I think this is a wake-up call for the African leaders. To the same extent that President Trump is saying USA first, African leaders must also say Africa first. This is a wake-up call to the African leaders to take inventory of what is really happening in their countries. Do they really need the peanuts that are coming in as aid? What is really going out? If I may use the example of what happened in Niger, when the government decided they were going to take over the mining of their uranium. The French companies that were mining the uranium were paying the government 80 cents a kilo for the uranium, and then turning around and selling the uranium to the rest of the world at 200 euros a kilo. So that one move from the Nigerian government to say we are now going to take ownership of our own uranium, they went from realizing about $1 billion in uranium resources to over 300 billion a year. Do you realize what I'm talking about? No amount of NGO could bring that kind of money. And this is only one mineral. Now imagine the country taking inventory of all their minerals and benefiting from their natural resources like the rest of the countries in the Western world. That is what African leaders need to look at.
Do you see that in the horizon of African leaders right now?
They're
do you see them? Who do you see as the standout winners of that kind of change? And who do you think is still chasing AID contracts?
Let me tell you, we need to look at what's happening in Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. President Traoré is standing up. He is saying the natural resources in Burkina Faso, they belong to the people of Burkina Faso. Niger is doing the same thing. Mali is doing the same thing. Every leader must look at what's happening in the Sahel nation.
Now, that is the tricky part. And I want you to pay close attention to this one. You hear the countries she mentioned, Burkina Faso, President Traoré, he is making a name of himself. He's recently, he just regained the power. There was a coup in Burkina Faso when they fought against this authoritarian dictator that was in charge and took over power. Now, President Traoré is the name that is making the rounds in terms of the African continent. But what she's just said right there, those three countries, I want you to pay attention to those three countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Once you decide that we are going to do our own things and we are going to take care of ourselves, we're going to take charge of everything that belongs to us, and now you have to deal with us on a business level. That's where the problem comes from. And I'm telling you this, I'm saying this. Next thing you're going to hear, you're going to start hearing mainstream media, because mainstream media is a part of this whole saga. They use mainstream media as the propaganda arm to support these elites, because once they start spreading that information, it spreads like wildfire. Now what you will start to hear is they will start to tell you about violations of human rights in Burkina Faso, and that is when they will tell you that they need to intervene to help people in Burkina Faso. They intervene only in countries they have interest, or where there are leaders that do not agree with them. That is the only time they intervene. Because you might say, well, if he's, torturing his own people, why don't they intervene? But like I said, don't take my word for it. Try to do your own research. Look it up. I want you to start following up on those 3 countries: Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger. Follow up on those countries and let me know what you will start hearing from those countries. First, what they do is they will start funding people within the country. Most of the time, these people are not even from the country. They will get people that are in exile, people that committed atrocities in their own countries and ran away, went into exile. Then they will get those same people, pay them money, send them back into that country, or even use them when they are still in exile. Use them to mobilize like militias on, these groups that are complaining about everything. And before you know it, there is an uprising. You remember Libya, Muammar Gaddafi? I'm quite sure the only thing you remember about Muammar Gaddafi is he was a blood-sucking monster, because that is what mainstream media told you about him. But was he really? Muammar Gaddafi, if you do really care and want to know, I want you to go and do research about the state of Libya during Gaddafi's regime and where Libya is right now. You think Libya is better off where it is today than it was with Gaddafi? Let's not go far. Let me play this video. And don't mind about the quality. What I want is the information in the video. Here is the Ugandan president, Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, talking about that same issue.
Now, when this problem of Libya started, the African Union, with our chairman, who is here now, this gentleman here, they formed a committee of a few of us. I think we were 6. I was one of them. The whole of the African Union gave that committee a mandate to look for a solution for the Libyan problem. Now, on one occasion, I didn't go that time. These excellencies, this one here, Jacob Zuma, and the others, I was not there, but my minister was among them. They entered a plane in Nouakchott, in his place. They were going to Libya to mediate. And they were told by NATO to go back. Yes. Said, you go back. Yes, he's here. If I'm telling you lies, I'm not the one who invited him, you're the one who invited him. African presidents on an African mission over African soil were ordered by NATO to go back. That NATO has not allowed them to land in Libya.
That is unbelievable. The damage they do compared to the good they do, the damage always outweighs the good. Now think about that. Africa has its own union, the African Union. It used to be the Organization of African Unity. They made it the African Union. That is for Africa, just like NATO is for Europe. So NATO, to command African leaders on an African mission in an African country. Really? And I hope you can understand why some people love President Trump. I'm one of them. I like him. He doesn't like to get into other people's affairs. When he says America first, he means it. And that is why they hate him. What you will see with mainstream media, they've hammered this man from the moment he declared getting into politics to this day. But before he got into politics, he was on every channel you could think of. He was featured on every broadcast. He was a darling to everyone until he decided to step into politics. So when we look at him and hear what he's saying, some of us that come from where I come from, or places like where I come from, we can understand. But because Americans, most of them care about their country, they don't know nothing about anything outside of America, that is a problem. I can tell you, I've come across people, the most spoken about country from Africa here in America. The one country that is spoken about the most is Egypt. Do you know that I've come across people that didn't know Egypt is in Africa, but they know about Egypt? That is how uninformed Americans are. They know about Egypt, but they don't know. I swear to God, I met this young lady. She told me she was 27 years. She had never in her entire life heard of the fact that Egypt is in Africa. And she thought it was so embarrassing because she was like, I'm 27. I mean, don't judge me, but I'm today years old. I've never heard this. You want to tell me that Egypt is in Africa? I was shocked. I was like, what? You know Egypt, but you don't know where it is? And I'm not saying this to troll Americans, but I'm just trying to paint a picture here. I'm just trying to show you a perspective so that you can understand what I'm saying and where I'm coming from. Americans are uninformed when it comes to outside of America. They don't know much. Now, that was the Ugandan president. He told you NATO stopped them from intervening in African affairs. Can you let that sink in for a moment? Now, why would they do that? Everyone benefited from the resources of the country. The country was rich, and everybody benefited from that. What Gaddafi was not, he wasn't a puppet, and he challenged the elites on every front.
To say, like anybody else, you must take care of your people. You have your natural resources. You have everything you need to take care of your people. Why do you continue to be beggars? Look at what is being brought in by not only USAID, but all the NGOs in your country. It's peanuts. It's a joke. It's a joke that the African leaders should continue to be beggars of peanuts when you are looking and allowing billions to get out of your country year in and year out, if not trillions, in natural resources that your people should be benefiting from. It is a wake-up call for African leaders to wake up and say, President Trump is saying, US first, America first. You too must say, your country first, because you have everything it takes. It is a joke. It is embarrassing to see I have not seen any African leader cry over USAID living. I can tell you for a fact, the average African leader privately is celebrating the exit of USAID because they know what is really going on.
Let me ask you a geopolitical question. And again, you and I have had the opportunity on this show to talk about it before, which is the relationship of the United States broadly with the African continent. And I realize the continent has a lot of different nations, different countries that are part of it. But President Trump is not known to care much about Africa. He has talked about it in very derogatory language. His comments about USAID have had nothing to do with Africa. They've had to do with downsizing the scale of government and the perception of corruption and policies that are not consistent with his own. He's not framed any of this in terms of African needs or whatnot. So when you think about that, what do you think is the possibility of changing the dynamics of the relationship between the Trump administration and African leaders when it doesn't seem to be on his radar screen?
To be honest with you, why should African leaders care? Why should Trump care about Africa? He shouldn't care about Africa to the same extent that the African leaders really shouldn't care about a relationship either. If the relationship can be worked out, that's wonderful. But if President Trump is saying, I have a mandate from my own people to take care of my people, and I'm doing what I need to do to take care of my people, African leaders need to take that same position. You see, it takes two to tango. If President Trump does not want a relationship with Africa, Africans shouldn't be begging for it. Are you with me?
Do you think this will transmit to the way Africa deals with Europe? With France, with Germany?
I'm hoping that this will translate into African leaders looking from within, because they don't really need to keep looking outside. They have what it takes. It's a wake-up call, just like what happened during COVID. It was a wake-up call for African leaders to realize that you must begin to look within Africa to take care of yourself. When the chips were down, the world walked away from Africa during COVID. So that's a reality. No supplies were coming to Africa. Africans were not manufacturing anything, and African leaders were forced to look from within. This, I'm hoping, is another wake-up call where African leaders also begin to realize we must look from within. But let me underscore this. The average African leader and majority of leaders of developing world, I can tell you, they are celebrating the exit of USAID, and we hope that there will be exits of many other NGOs that are carrying out nefarious activities in Africa and anywhere else in the developing world in order to further the agendas of their governments, which is to continuously destabilize, divide, and conquer.
To be quite candid, Ambassador, much of the world looks at the African continent as a gold mine, as a diamond mine, as a mine for precious materials and resources, which we've talked about. One of those other major powers, rising powers in the world, is China. Yes. China has huge stakes, and there's always been the narrative that America is not doing aid very well in Africa, that China is beating us. Bono would come out and say, hey, in all of the refugee camps and whatnot set up in Africa, even the tents say made in China, even though the United States may be providing the support.
Yes.
That there's a lot of both criticism and acclaim for the fact that China has been involved in recent decades in helping Africa develop its infrastructure and whatnot, to position itself better in Africa than the United States and maybe Europe have with regards to resource agreements in Africa. So is China the next villain in the story?
Well, again, my position is Africans must take a position and protect their turf. China wants to come and exploit Africa, they'll get away with it to the extent that Africans allow them. The United States wants to come and exploit Africa, they'll get away with it to the extent that the Africans will allow them. The question is, does Africa have an African position when they come to the negotiating table with the world? The answer right now is no. Africa must unite. Africa must speak with one voice, and Africa must go to the world stage with one voice, one agenda, one plan that the world will have to respond. But as long as Africa is going to the world as bitty little countries, as Togo, as Eswatini, as Guinea-Bissau, Africa is fighting a losing game. Africa must unite, and Africa must speak with one voice. That is the only way a strong, united Africa can take a rightful place on the world stage and be respected and stop the exploitation.
Why is it so hard?
Now, that, my friend, is what the late Colonel Muammar Gaddafi wanted to do. That is exactly what he was trying to do, and they never let him go through with that because he had all the resources, he had the money, and what history has taught us, I mean, to some of us who've taken the initiative to at least read and understand about history, what you will realize is that not every person that was labeled bad was really a bad person. All these people that we hear about in history that were labeled as terrible people, bad people, they were the worst humans to exist. Not all of them are bad. It all depends on how you see it or where you stand from it. There is a very good quote from Malcolm X where he said, the media is the most dangerous machine. It has the power to make the bad or the guilty look innocent and the innocent look guilty. What I want you to realize is that not anyone that is labeled as bad or terrible is actually terrible. They are labeled like that because they have the power. The propaganda machine is in their favor, so they get to write the history. They get to provide or present to you what they want you to know or they want you to see. They don't give you all the facts. And this is my problem.
I think it's a long history. If you go back to colonization, if you go back to the Christianity and how it was introduced, how we were trained to be subservient. In Africa, the rules of the game were the same. I think that what was done to brainwash Black people around the world, long before they even left Africa, we are still suffering from that legacy of colonization, the legacy of slavery, where the people in power, they themselves don't believe they can do it. We still have leaders who believe you can't make it unless you're working with white people. We have individuals who think only something brought in by white people is what's likely to succeed. With that kind of mentality, it is a very difficult battle. Our battle to succeed, to unite as the African continent, it is a battle of the mind. And each and every African must realize that we are defeated where it matters the most, which is the mind. Brainwashed to the core. Brainwashed to not believe in ourselves and what we can do as individuals. Wherein lies the problem.
I won't call them nationalists, but our continentalists are those that are trying to, as you say, take stock of their situation and raise up Africa and their nations by their own bootstraps to be less dependent on external countries and investment and aid. Is that flavor beginning to take hold? Is that sort of leadership being, is it more and more evident, or do you think you have a big lift ahead?
I think what's happening in the United States through President Trump is going to make them realize that this is what you need to do. You're going to have to pull yourself up by the bootstraps. President Trump is saying, I have a mandate, America first. So you Africans, are you going to sit back and just wait and see the next move that President Trump is going to make? Or you're going to also say, I have a mandate from my people, and I'm going to do what I need to do. Take inventory of what you have in your country. Use it and use it wisely. No more begging. You don't need to have anybody filling the gaps in your educational system. You don't need anybody filling the gaps in your healthcare system. You don't need anybody creating initiatives in the most remote parts of your country because they claim that you, the government, cannot have access to that. How can somebody come from all the way from the United States, all the way from Britain, and access the most remote part of your country that you in your country cannot access? It is the most stupid thing. When you listen to the justifications and the explanations as to why they are there, it's a joke, and this needs to stop.
Just finally, Ambassador, when you look at U.S. behavior retracting, we've just got a minute left, but I would love to know from you, what do you think about the UN? What do you think about the International Court of Justice? Because probably the contraction that we're talking about is going to happen in a lot of institutions. Do you worry that Africa will be worse off without those institutions?
No, those institutions were created after the Second World War. United Nations, it took 4 weeks to create the United Nations. Why? In order to help the recovery of Europe. The World Bank, the IMF, it took 3 weeks to create them after the Second World War in order to aid in the recovery of Europe from its own self-implosion and destruction. So no. These institutions were not created to benefit the developing world. To the contrary, they were built to steal from the developing world. Their success is based on the failures of the developing nations where they have been stealing from. So no. We must celebrate what President Trump is doing by exiting the United Nations, by exiting the World Health Organization. We need the U.S. to exit the World Trade Organization because they're doing nothing on the African end. They're giving a blind eye to blatant exploitations, unequal, uneven trade policies that are hurting Africa. You take, for example, cocoa. Majority of the cocoa coming out of the world comes from West Africa, and yet it's only recently that African nations were allowed to add value to their cocoa. The World Trade Organizations, we may have a sister in charge.
Well, Ambassador Adikana Chihombori-Quao, grateful. Whenever I talk to you, it is a new reset for us to hear your very fresh takes on the.
Now that my friend, is what I wanted to bring to you and shed some light and show you some insights on, from the motherland. I mean, we're talking about USAID, but what you do realize is that USAID is not necessarily for Americans. It's for Africa and other developing countries. So, I mean, there are so many Americans that, have jobs with the USAID. I can understand that part, but for the most part, it's upon us to enlighten each other. If you know something, say something. Let's teach each other. If there is something I missed or I didn't clarify or something you were challenging in this conversation, yeah, you can reach out down in the comments below. But that is what I wanted to tell you, my friend. All right. My name is Martin, and this is a different perspective. Like, share the video, comment anything you want to ask me, anything you want to challenge me on, comment it down in the comments below. I'll read everything and I'll react to everything. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Let's grow the channel together. Again, like I said, my mission is to make sure Americans understand how blessed they are to have this country. Please don't destroy your country.